Hey everybody, how's it going? It's been quite a long time since my last Hunter x Hunter video, and pretty much since the last time I spoke about it, I've received request after request after request to discuss the series again. Not a whole lot of people told me exactly what they wanted the video to be about, though, so I was forced to come up with a topic on my own, and this is what I ended up deciding would be the most interesting. Now, this is about as big and grand as it gets when it comes to hypothetical Hunter x Hunter fights, because based on various statements made throughout the series, Netero is the most, or at least one of the most powerful human nen users of all time, and Meruem is probably the most powerful nen user we've seen ever up to this point. Prince Saryednik may end up taking both of these titles from them by the end of the Dark Continent Expedition arc. It's definitely not clear exactly how strong he's going to end up getting, but for now, with the information we currently have, I think it's pretty safe to say that these two are the most powerful members of their respective species. Of course, the two of them have already fought before, but it was under pretty different circumstances than the ones I'm proposing in this video. In their actual fight, Meruem had an overwhelming advantage, but to a lot of people, and this is why I'm making this video, it's unclear how much of this can be attributed to Netero's comparatively weak and frail old body. I say comparatively because despite the fact that Netero was very old and many years past his prime, he was still leaps and bounds more powerful than anyone else in the entire Hunter Association. So he's not actually that weak or that frail in any sense other than when compared to himself in his physical prime, and I guess also when compared to Meruem. Fortunately, we get a figure from the mouth of Netero himself that sort of quantifies how old age has physically affected him. According to him, at the time of the castle invasion, he's only about half as strong as he was in his youth, which in other words means that in his prime, Netero was twice as powerful as he was when he fought Meruem. Now, there are a handful of other things to take into account here, but the basic general premise of the fight, the question that needs answering for us to determine a winner, is could Netero have beaten Meruem if he was twice as powerful when he fought him? Now again, there is a bit more to it than that, and as we go over more aspects of the fight, it'll become apparent that the question is a little bit more complicated than I made it sound, but like I said, it's just the general basic bare bones premise. Moving on, something else I mentioned earlier is that Netero and Meruem have already fought before, and another thing I'd like to point out is that the fight in question is the only time we ever really get to see either of them actually seriously fight somebody. Technically, Netero fought Gon and Killua at the beginning of the series, but that isn't even close to the same thing as what I'm talking about here. The reason this is important is because neither of them have fought anyone aside from one another, so I don't have to do any cross-referencing in this video. No comparing this fight to that fight, this opponent to that opponent, none of that. I might bring up some other fights that don't directly involve either Netero or Meruem to help prove certain points, but for the most part, I'm going to be focusing solely on the fight that they had in the underground tomb. Now, I know some of you are going to bring up Hunter x Hunter Last Mission in the comments if I don't say anything about it, especially because we do get to see Netero fight somebody in this movie, and it's not even like old Netero does it. We see full power, young man, prime Netero in action here. Now, the issue is Netero's fight against Jed is from a non-canon movie, meaning it didn't actually happen, so its value in a discussion like this one is a bit questionable. Even if that wasn't the case, the fight is really short because for those of you who haven't seen it, what happens in it is exactly what you'd expect to happen to anyone who challenges Netero. Jed gets decimated in like 3 seconds, and because of how short the fight is, it's hard to infer anything from it about Netero's strength. The only relevant takeaway from this fight is that Netero's Bodhisattva seems to be moving quite a bit faster than it was in his fight against Meruem, but based on statements that I've already discussed, I didn't find that super surprising, and just thought it was something you'd expect to see of a young Netero. Nothing groundbreaking. Anyway, now that that's out of the way, I have a list of bullet points I'd like to go through, each point pertaining to information relevant to determining the strength of both characters. First, let's talk about the fact that Prime Netero is supposedly twice as powerful as his older self. It's important to recognize that if this is true, it doesn't necessarily mean that young Netero just hit twice as hard as old Netero did. This statement probably applies to every one of his physical attributes. His speed, durability, reflexes, a lot more than just his raw strength. The most important of these attributes is his speed, without a doubt, at least assuming that any increases to Netero's speed also apply to the Guanyin Bodhisattva speed. In the original fight, a lot of attention is brought to the fact that even though Netero himself isn't faster than Meruem, the 100-type Bodhisattva, on the other hand, is. This didn't matter to Meruem because he could just continue charging at Netero, and anytime the Bodhisattva swatted him away, the damage he'd received from the hit was negligible. He barely felt anything, so he could keep keep charging at Netero, getting hit away, charging at Netero, getting hit away over and over until he was able to spot an opening. Meruem's strategy here might not be nearly as effective in the event that the Bodhisattva is able to move twice as quickly and hit twice as hard though. Not because Meruem would take a substantial amount of damage or anything like that after being hit by it, I think it would barely affect him just like in the original fight, but because I think it would make it significantly harder for him to crack through Netero's defense. The Bodhisattva was already way faster than Meruem, and it also sent him flying with each hit. If you doubled the speed of its attacks and increased the knockback of each hit by a noticeable amount, Meruem would have a much harder time getting close to Netero than he already did. Now the thing is, like I was saying earlier, there's a lot more to this discussion than this one point. If this statement about Netero only being about half as strong as he used to be was the only one we had to work with, then that'd be one thing, but things are actually a lot more complicated than that. First of all, Netero says that Pidu is more powerful than him, which is a pretty big deal because I think we can all agree that there's at least a good to fair chance that Meruem is more than twice as strong as Pidu. Even if you don't agree with this, it's important to keep one thing in mind, and that's that Meruem doesn't have to be twice as powerful as Pidu for him to be stronger than Prime Netero. Netero said that Pidu was stronger than him, not that the two were rivals, or even that the two were roughly close together in power. It's hard to say whether or not this statement is true though, because while we do get to see Netero and Pidu interact, it's only one time, and the scene where this interaction takes place seems to contradict what Netero says. When he and Zeno first begin the siege of Meruem's castle, Netero just sort of smacks Pidu away like it's no big deal and doesn't seem concerned at all by the confrontation. But at the same time, we also find out that Pidu was able to see this attack coming, and we can see that she wasn't damaged by it either. So if we ignore Netero's initial statement and just infer what we can from this one scene, it's not really clear who's stronger or if there even is a power gap in the first place. At first glance, it might seem like Netero is the stronger of the two, but it's hard to stand by that knowing that Pidu wasn't really affected by his attack like at all. Now this scene on its own doesn't tell us much, but it's still important because of the things we learned during Gon's fight with Pidu. Shortly after Gon transforms into his adult form, Pidu mentions that he might even pose a threat to the king himself. And now it's hard to tell exactly what this statement means, especially because it's the only one in the whole series that attempts to actually quantify how strong Gon is in this state, but we at least know that he was strong enough to warrant a comparison between he and Meruem in the first place. This sort of thing never happened with Netero, on the other hand. None of the royal ants ever said or thought anything that implied they considered him a threat to the king. Now based on their fight, I think it's totally fair to assume that Gon is at least twice as strong as Pidu is. The only thing in the fight that really contradicts this is Pidu being able to rip off one of Gon's arms, but first of all, Gon was caught completely off guard when this happened to him, and second of all, Pidu was dead, which is important because the series has told us that a person's nen becomes more powerful after their death. But even if you don't agree with this, if you refuse to believe that Gon was twice as strong as Pidu, surely we can agree that Gon was twice as strong, if not more, than Netero, right? At least in my opinion, that's pretty hard to dispute. 3 attacks from Gon was all it took to kill Pidu, and one of these attacks was just a regular kick, not amped by Nen or anything. And like I said earlier, one of Netero's attacks was pretty much completely ineffective against Pidu, and even if it did leave a little bit of a mark, it didn't come anywhere close to doing lethal damage. So now that we're hopefully in agreement that adult Gon is at least twice as strong as Netero, this means that for Netero to have any sort of noticeable physical advantage in this fight, adult Gon would have had to have been significantly more powerful than Meruem was. In my opinion, it's a lot more realistic to assume that Gon was slightly weaker than Meruem, and that he was a lot more than twice as strong as Netero. In this case, even if Netero was twice as strong in his prime like he claimed he was, there would still be a gigantic physical disparity between he and Meruem that existed in Meruem's favor. Not to mention, in his youth, Netero probably wouldn't be nearly as experienced or wise as he was during the castle invasion. Netero also said that he could feel his strength returning to him over the course of the castle invasion, which implies that the gap between his power in his old age and his power in his prime was even smaller than the 2 times he initially said it was. And then I think the final nail in the coffin is that Meruem didn't try to kill Netero at any point in their fight. Meruem was promised that he would learn his name if he could defeat Netero without killing him, and this made a much bigger difference than you would expect. Fighting this way was something that Meruem compared to playing chess without a rook or a bishop, which sounds really hard to do if you're playing against somebody who's even sort of close to your level of skill. So even though the fight was already one-sided enough as it is, I think Meruem would have made Netero look like a joke if he had been fighting to kill the whole time. The only thing in Netero's arsenal that poses any sort of threat to Meruem, in my opinion, is Zero Hand, which requires days of prep time before it can be used anyway. And even if you gave Netero the prep time he needed to perform Zero Hand, I'm not convinced that doubling its power would be enough for it to kill Meruem. In the original fight, it did leave him with clear severe visible injuries, but it wasn't like he was in critical shape or crippled or anything. After being hit by it, Meruem also went out of his way to praise Netero, and even said that Zero Hand was a magnificent attack, but he didn't say anything that implied the attack left him near death or threatened his safety in any way. So as scary as a full power Prime Netero sounds, I think I'm gonna say that Meruem has this one in the bag.